Come on. Okay, now it's being recorded. And so I'm going to briefly revisit that statement, but I'm going to ask you all to chat in the box whether you know what secondary data analysis is. So this is Make a Date with Data. I'm Nina. I'm much better with data than I am with technology. And this is Icpsr, the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research, which is a great place to find and learn about data across all kinds of social issues. And currently, I'm asking people whether they know what secondary data analysis is, and it looks like we're pretty good at that. Yep. So yeah, exactly. Secondary data analysis is using data that's already been collected to do your own research. And so it's really hard for us to collect one of these tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people types of surveys. But Icpsr is a great place to get those huge sample size surveys so that you can perform your own analysis on those types of issues that they may have collected. And they collect stuff on, or preserve stuff that's been collected on all kinds of different topics. They're also a great source for training on the discovery of data, the analysis of data, and the stewardship or management of data across the research process. So what do we do with Icpsr? The main thing it's for is going to be for finding data sets. They do a lot of other stuff, but if you need a data set to explore, analyze, think about, check some other people's operational definitions, if you want to download data, Icpsr is just a fantastic place to do it. You can analyze some of that data on the website directly. There's some learning and teaching resources on working with data. They have a great YouTube channel, but they also have some articles on the website. If you're pretty new to data, they've got good articles on how to read and analyze and cite data, and I get a lot of questions about that. You do have to cite your data sets as well as articles that you've read when you're writing something up. And data can be a little awkward to cite, so they've got some stuff on that. If you're teaching, there are teaching resources to help you teach those things. And when you're doing original research that you want to manage or preserve for a grant or for journal article compliance, there's a lot of resources on learning to manage and preserve your data as well. And they're a place that you can deposit data for preservation and sharing. So if you need to share data for that kind of compliance, they are a place you can do that. Now, Icpsr, of course, you search it through the library, but you can't search them through the main article search the way that you would search for a book or a DVD in the library. Because data is handled differently than journal articles are, you have to go directly to the All Databases button and then either type in Icpsr or go to the letter I. When you get to Icpsr's website, I really don't like their website. I mean, it's a pretty website, but the problem is most people either see the news at the bottom or they see the big picture of Michigan's campus in the fall, which I'm sure is lovely. Actually, it is a very nice picture, but all the important stuff is in the bar at the top, which kind of looks like something you want to overlook. So you really want to concentrate not on the pictures, but on the bar at the top, the green bar that has a search box, and then the menus that are over top of it. The smallest things on the entire page, the menus at the very, very top. The search box is going to be the quick and dirty place to find data. Then there's a Find Data menu above that and to the left that you can use to get some more sophisticated ways of searching data. And you may also want those teaching and learning resources, which are under the teaching and learning menu. And then I didn't do an arrow to it, but there is, I've got a cursor somewhere. Maybe I don't. There is a data management and curation menu there that if you're interested in learning data management, that's also a place you can go. But that Find Data menu and Search Data box are going to be your main places to go in Icpsr. archival studies comes under this. I see a question. Some archival studies in the sense of visual data, but mostly it would be archives of data. So if you wanted to look at the evolution of social issues through the civil rights movement, you could do a primary source history study through documents, and then parallel to that, look at the social evolutions that happened during that time period from historical data. So it's going to be mostly numeric data, but there are some picture and video archives in here too. That was a question from the chat box. So the quick and dirty search, if I want to search for the topic of music, I type that into the search box and click the search button, and it gives me a search results page. And you saw on the left-hand side, the filter results has a circle around it now. And the reason for that is, like a lot of journal articles or web searches, when I search for music, I'm going to get 726 studies with a lot of sub-studies for a total of 2,300 groups of data. That's just not going to be helpful. That's like getting a million Google results. I don't really care about what's on page 50,000 of my Google results. So I'm going to want to use these filters on the side to narrow in what kinds of information I really want to focus on. Some of the best things that you can filter for, you can see the list of filters here blown up. The most common ones that you're going to want are the geography, where you can say, I want a global or a specific country. Most commonly, I'm going to get people who want to narrow to just United States results, or specific states, you only want Virginia. You can also narrow to what data format there is. So most of us don't know, I would say all of us don't know every single data platform out there. So depending on whether you're an Excel user, and then you would look for data format, what they call delimited, or you're an R user or SPSS, or you only want to do your analysis on the website. You don't want to download and have to mess with software. So you can choose specific data formats that you're comfortable with. And then last, but definitely not least, the time period is the one that most people ask about, because they tend to want things that are going to address more recent, although people who are looking at historical issues or longitudinal studies, changes over time, may want a longer time period. I get a lot of people who are like, well, I don't want something that's 20 years ago. On the one hand, statistics are slow. So when the census comes out in 2020, they're going to collect that data, but we won't see any of that data until, even the preliminary stuff won't come to us until at least 2022, and we won't have the complete processed data sets and tables that have been kind of pre-made for us until probably 2024, 2025. So it takes anywhere from a year to 5 or 6 years to process some of these large data sets. So you're never going to have 2018 data in an archive like this. But, and if you need that kind of stuff, let me know. I can try to work with you on it. Separately, as a consultation, I love doing one-on-ones. But a lot of times people want the most recent or last 5 years or since the economic downturn. That's a really popular choice. So the time period is the most common thing I get. So if I take my music search and I limit it to the last 5 years, and you'll see here up in the upper left, it shows me what years I limited to, then I'm only going to get things that have at least some data from the last 5 years. And I'll see I've got estimates of arts participation patterns. So who does what kinds of arts? Basic survey. Time use survey. How much time do people do different artistic activities? And that would include music. So how much time do people spend either going to musical events or using a musical instrument? The CBS News survey does a lot of news stories. and public perception and reactions to those news stories. So these would be different things that have some discussion of music in them that I could then go through and find out recently about people's interest in supporting arts, people's interest, youth participation in arts and music. So there's a lot of stuff in here once you've narrowed it down with those filters, so you're not trying to dig through. That was the basic search. I'm going to talk about the advanced finding and browsing options in a minute. But before I go any farther into using the Find Data menu for those browsing options, the resources for students are also under Find Data. And it's got a great thing on how to read a data-focused journal article, and another great guide on interpreting SPSS output, which is something that takes a little bit of getting used to. So if you're new to SPSS, you may want to take a look at that. And also resources on citing data, writing data management plans. So there's some good stuff in there for learning. But in addition to the search box, if you click Find Data above the search box and then Find Data again, it's going to give you other ways to look for data. It brings up some browsing options. On the right-hand side, you see I've got a screenshot here of the popular search terms. This is really good when you've got a professor or you are a professor who says, find a data set that interests you. A lot of times then people are going to say, well, I want something on student job placement. That may or may not be exactly the way that a data set is searched for or organized. So this popular search terms is a good place to go if you want to kind of browse through some things that you might search for in data. And that'll give ideas about gender issues or about bullying or about marijuana and what kinds of topics that people have searched for and found data in the past. So that search terms is a good way when you've just got a sort of free form assignment. When you've got a more specific list of issues, though, the browse on the left is a really good way to find data, because Icpsr is a great resource, but it's not super smart about terminology. And so, for example, I did music earlier, but someone searching for violin wouldn't necessarily get that search. Likewise, if I mentioned someone missing a limb earlier, I might have searched for prosthetics and not found anything or found very little. But then when I search for amputations or missing limbs, I might find different results. So it's not super intelligent about how it interprets your words. And so a lot of times browsing is going to be more effective and give you some ideas for what kind of data you might be able to work with. Under Browse, there's a Topics option, and those are going to be more like your disciplinary topics, like topics you would major in. So you can see here we've got education, we've got healthcare, we've got government and politics, we've got community studies and urban studies. So things that are typically more like you would see a university department in. So those are really good when you're looking for something that might suit your major. There's also a set of thematic data collections, which are more interdisciplinary types of topics that could go across majors. So you can see here we've got population research on LGBT health. That could be something for social issues, it could be something for healthcare, it could be something for gender studies, it could be something for history. So there's a lot of different ways that could be applied. And you see also we've got child care and early education, which is going to include everything from youth, birth through K. We've got civic action and civic engagement. There's a lot of different kind of interdisciplinary areas. So even though topics and thematic data are similar, they're going to be completely different collections that have been put together for people to work with. And I want to note, because we've had some exciting things happening with the government, Uh, if there is a shutdown that affects government data websites, which we have seen in the past, although we didn't have that in the last shutdown, the Data Lumos archives here under thematic data collections will continue to archive that data. So even if government data websites, things that you would normally Google data for, like census.gov, if those shut down and those websites are taken offline, then you can still get to that data here through Data Lumos. In addition to the topics and the thematic collections, if you don't want to deal with a statistical software suite, you haven't had that training, you're on a computer that you don't want to try to run it. By the way, if you're looking for that software on campus, the Apps to Go is a place that you can get Stata and SPSS and SAS and all those kinds of stuff. But if you're having trouble with that, or you just don't want to deal with it, or you don't like using SPSS, then you can run basic statistics, or you're in a hurry, you can run basic statistics online. That'll let you do what we call a cross-tabulation or crosstab, which is a custom table. So like a table you would normally see with rows with column headers on the top and row headers on the side, and 2 or 3 columns of data organized the way that you want it. And I'm going to do a live demo of that later, assuming the internet doesn't flake out on me. You can also do basic correlations, ANOVAs, and bivariate regressions, but not multivariate regressions and other fancier, more complicated stuff. So the online analysis data sets, which are, I don't know, maybe about 1/5 of the data sets have the online analysis available. Those are a big help if you just want some quick and dirty, and you go to browse and pick this, and that'll let you look through those lists. Unfortunately, you still need to understand what the analysis means, so it'll give you a coefficient or a number, but it won't actually let you know what it means. But I do get a lot of questions where people are like, well, I Googled and I found a table, but it doesn't have the data sliced the way that I want. It's got it by age and socioeconomic bracket, but or economic bracket, and I really need it by age and labor category or something. This is a way that you can reslice that data to fit what you need when Google has failed you somehow. There's a list of studies with learning guides, which has lesson plans that faculty can implement in the classroom and that students can use to self-teach. I don't really like this link to the learning guides. And so the teaching and learning menu, which you'll remember it had a little dotted line to it in the screenshot that I had of the upper menu. The teaching and learning menu has a somewhat better landing page for getting to those learning guides. That teaching and learning menu, the overview option under that, has this link to these data-driven learning guides, which are different lesson plans that you can use in a classroom. And one of the things I like about this is it's got the option to look by analysis method. So typically in a class, you might start with cross-tabulations and then move to correlations and then move to regressions. This way you can look for a specific lesson plan on the type of thing that you're doing in class. Now me, as someone who self-guides, I've taken classes, of course, but a lot of times I need a refresher really quickly. I might go in here and say, well, I want to see what kind of data set and what the steps that they say I should make are on bivariate regression, and then I could go in and I could browse by analysis method for regression, and I could read through that lesson plan and see what would a teacher teach on that in the classroom, and then see if I can replicate the same activity on my own. So it's good for that. If you were setting up if you're a professor, I think we had a couple of professors register, you can also use these exercise modules, which are kind of set up to go through an entire semester of scaffolded learning on research methods, statistical, quantitative research methods. So that's super handy for that kind of situation. So there's some really good lesson plans that have been written up in here. Okay, do we have any questions so far? I'm about to switch to a live demo, the internet and computer willing. I don't see any questions in the chat. So let's say that I'm in communications, writing a story on alcohol exposure to youth, or I'm doing counseling or addiction studies or education project, and I want to look at alcohol exposure in youth. And there's tons of different areas that might be interested in this. And so I decide that I'm going to have the following research question. Is there a difference, based on sex, in the proportion of secondary school students who were introduced to underage drinking? So in other words, is there a difference between boys and girls on how many students in either middle school or high school who have been drinking as underage drinkers? Because if they're in high school or middle school, they're presumably underaged. So if I want to answer this question, Icpsr is a great place to do this. I'm going to go to the library. I'm going to go to the All Databases link underneath the search box. Come on, internet. I'm going to go to the letter I, or I can just type in Icpsr under search database names. In I get an alphabetical list. It's the second option. If I'm off campus, I'm going to have to log in. If I'm on campus, and I am off campus, so I'm going to have to log in. I didn't think about that in advance, did I? Ha ha ha. Oh, that's so cute. That wasn't there yesterday. Here's the Icpsr website, as I showed you earlier, slightly different screenshot. You can see they too are celebrating Love Data Week. And apparently their cat just loves data. The internets are full of cats. Come on, you were not full screen. Give me a full screen. I guess you were full screen. And as I mentioned before, this upper menu here, despite the adorable picture of the cat, I don't know how they got it to sit on that heart like that, but this is going to be really where I want to go, is up here in this area. I'm going to put in youth and alcohol. When you search and you've got two different concepts, you probably already know this from journal article searching, but I'm going to say it anyway. When you've got two different concepts and you want to combine them, a lot of times you need to put the word "and" in between them. Icpsr, like I said, they're not always the most sophisticated search, and so it's good to tell it, I need youth and I need alcohol, but I'm not looking for youth alcohol. I'm looking for the two concepts, the two words together in the same data set, but not together right next to each other, like in a phrase. And I imagine that alcohol behaviors have probably changed, and gender dynamics have definitely changed over time. So I know that I probably want pretty recent stuff. I also want to go ahead and run this online. Either my SPSS isn't working, or I just don't feel like dealing with it, or I'm doing a webinar where SPSS is a totally separate topic that y'all probably don't want to see right now. Although if you do, again, you can come talk to me. So I'm going to do type of analysis. Sorry, I'm going to do data format. Haha. Online analysis. Then I'm going to just see what's the most recent that I can find. I mentioned earlier that you can use the time period if you've got a certain amount of years. It's got to be in the last 5 years, got to be in the last 10 years. You can also sort by time period to get it to bring up the ones that are about the most recent time period. Now, this is a little different from released updated, which is when the data came out. Sometimes the data could come out of for a very old data collection period, but they've only just translated and archived it recently. Maybe it was in print and it wasn't digitized, or it was on old tape reels or something. It wasn't digitized in a way that you could read through the internet. So make sure that time period, if what you want is the time of the data, not the update of the release, time period is what you would want. So I'm going to sort this to bring those newer time periods up towards the top and push the older time periods up towards the bottom. And the first one, Monitoring the Future, a study of American youth, 8th to 10th grade, 2016, that's really recent. It's rare that you get data that's only a couple years old like that. But 8th to 10th grade, that would be perfect. Personally, I would hope that there wouldn't be a whole lot of people who've done a lot of drinking in 8th and 10th grade. But I'm old, so, you know, I probably have old-fashioned views on that. I could hope anyway. Once you get into a data set, you're going to get this big kind of confusing. There's a lot of stuff when we work with data. There's a lot of stuff that kind of goes with the numbers. The first thing I want to do is check the summary. And it'll always be cut off with just a couple of sentences. So there's a more info link here. That'll let me know what kind of stuff can I find in here. There's more than 450 variables. They cover drugs. One of them is alcohol. It doesn't mention opioids, but it does mention prescription drugs. So, you know, for those of you who are interested in, since VCU has such a huge research base on opioid addiction, that could be a good place to look for that. They also have values, behaviors, lifestyle. So there's a lot of different topics in here, but I'm currently only interested in this alcohol. So it looks like it should have what I want. It's going to tell me this is a huge data set. If you try to download it, it's probably going to take forever. The Analyze Online, when it's available, is going to be here. But before I start analyzing, one of the things that's very picky about working with data is I need to know how they operationalized their data. So when I'm thinking about, and operationalized is fancy pants technical term for how they defined it. If I'm thinking about drinking, am I talking about a couple of sips at a cousin's wedding or something? Would I really count that as underage drinking? Do I want to? I don't know if that would be, if I were doing a study on underage drinking, it's probably not. I probably don't want people who've just had a couple of sips at a social event with their parents nearby. I'm really, in my head, I'm thinking like going out and having at least a beer or a wine cooler or whatever, a malternative with other teenagers, or other youth. So I'm not really thinking, I'm not imagining someone who's just had a little bit. I may be thinking of someone who has it regularly. So when I'm designing a study, when I'm looking for data about a study, I need to think about those data definitions. Precisely how was the data collected? And what did they ask? How did they define it? Or how did they operationalize the concept? If I'm writing it up, I'm also going to need to write that up in a lot of detail in my dissertation, my thesis, my research paper, my journal article. So I need to know a little bit more than just running the Crosstab itself. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to look at this documentation. The documentation that goes with a study, a data collection, is really, really important to knowing whether I can work with that or not. And so I'm going to open the Codebook. The Codebook is a document that that should show all of the variable codes. So if they have variable 1 and variable 2 and variable 3, and they call them V1, V2, and V3, which is not a good practice from a data management point of view. I'm blinking. Can everyone still see me okay? My Zoom just started blinking. Okay, thank you. Yes, okay. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what it's blinking for. So the Codebook would say, if I've got a variable that I call V1, what does that V1 stand for? If I've got a variable that's called V2, what does that V2 stand for? And you saw there were 450 variables, so I'm going to need to go through this and see what kinds of stuff they are looking at. How are they defining their data? Well, if I'm lucky, they may have shared the exact questions that were asked. But even if not, there should be some further information that tells me both what the codes are, what they're called in the data set, so I know what I'm looking for, and then what do those really mean, which I'm going to need when I write up my journal article or my research paper saying, or my dissertation or thesis, saying my methodology section that says what are each of these variables actually meaning. So go away. So this is a really important step that a lot of times may not be obvious to you. So I've opened this in Adobe Acrobat specifically so that I can see this bookmarks on the side. If I had opened it in my if I'd opened it in my browser, I would get the pages. This is a 300-page document. I don't feel like reading through it all. So I want this extra thing that they call the bookmarks. It's like a table of contents that'll let me jump around in it. So if you're doing this in Chrome or in Firefox, you want to go to where it downloads, and you want to open it in Adobe Acrobat so you can see the whole thing. And first, we're going to get a whole lot of information about who did it. It's going to describe the data collection. It's going to go in depth about, well, how was the sampling done? What was the representation? What was the response rate? All that kind of stuff. This is all stuff that you're going to either paraphrase or even directly quote. Probably paraphrase, because direct quotes are a little funny in the social sciences. You usually want to avoid them. But you're going to use this information and cite it from this code book when you write up the methods section of a thesis, dissertation, or journal article. Because when you do that methods section, you need to know what was the sampling frame, what was the response rate. You want to look at how the representation was in the study to see, was it well balanced across geographies and races and genders, what precautions were taken, those kinds of things, so that you have your readers and you have some real understanding of how generalizable this data is, or how well it goes to a bigger population. So this part in this code book is going to be super valuable if you decide you're going to use this data set and write it up into your thesis, dissertation, journal article, grant, etc. I don't need to know this right now, but I would really, really need to know that this information is here before I decided to use it for a thesis or dissertation. So what I want to know really is these sections over here where my variables are listed. Since alcohol is a drug, and I don't seem to have a demographics section at the start, the two things, if you'll remember my question, are whether people have been introduced to underage drinking, and gender. So those are the two variables I need to find. A lot of times demographics, which is where I would expect to find my gender, are at the start. They don't seem to be in this case, but drugs are. And so I'm expecting to find my alcohol somewhere under here. Since I'm thinking of looking back at my research question, and remember that your research question, not only is it the hardest part of developing a good quantitative study, or any good study really, it also controls some very fine details of what you want to look for when you're looking for data in a data set. In my case, I was looking for introduced to drinking. So I really want something like, have they ever drunk? I've got incidents of first use. That might be in the right ballpark. Quantity, that would be interesting if I wanted to know a number of uses in the last 30 days, if I was thinking about whether they were addicted. That's not exactly my question, but this would be really interesting pieces of data to look for. Number of uses in last 12 months. So a lot of these different things could be used to look at behaviors over time, severity of addiction, impacts. There's some interesting stuff in there. I'm going to look under number of uses in lifetime because I'm really looking for people who've just got a few uses to up to however many. So introduced on up. And here I see one that says ever drink, and that looks like it might be promising. So I'm going to click on it. And it does actually give me the question, thank goodness. We want to ask you about alcoholic beverages, including beer, wine, liquor, and any other beverage that contains alcohol. Have you ever had any alcoholic beverage to drink more than just a few sips? This is right in the area of the question I want. It's going to exclude the people who just had a sip of champagne with their parents at their cousin's wedding or bryst, or it's going to really lean towards people who at least have had a whole beer or a whole wine cooler or a whole tequila shot or something. It gives me a little bit of summary information about this. So I know at basic that 31%, close to a third of the participants, said that yes, they had had a drink by 10th grade. So I know that this is going to have enough. I've got a huge number of responses here, 30,000-ish total, 32, but 2,000 of them were missing data. It does tell me how much missing data there was, which again is something you need in your methods and your results write-up. So I've got 30,000 valid cases. That's definitely enough for me to run just about any kind of analysis that I want. It's huge sample size. It's actually so big that with a lot of analysis, I'd have to be concerned about having a false positive or saying that there was a significant difference of something when there really wasn't. That's kind of very specific statistical concern. But for those of you that are, I've got a few people here that are in operations research and so on, keep in mind that with these really huge data sets, you have to be worried about a different kind of error. So I've got enough here to work with. And now I want to find out about gender. Can I cross these 31% here to see whether gender, there's a big difference in gender? And I, of course, like I said, I'm kind of old. I'm assuming that guys are going to be the ones that have started drinking more by 10th grade. But it's stupid to make an assumption when I could just find data to prove that. So I'm going to close up drugs, and I'm going to try to look for that demographics that I didn't see earlier. And I'm going to look through my sections: education, work and leisure. I see sex, but that's sex roles. So that's more like gender dynamics than biological sex. Well, I might want to get into differences of sex versus gender. That's not in the core of my research question. But I do eventually get down to background. which isn't exactly the same as demographics, but let's see what they count as background. And yes, they've said age, sex, and race. And I have R sex, that looks promising. Whoop, wrong direction. Sorry. The headers here are at the bottom of the page sometimes, and that throws off my my Adobe Acrobat. So what is your sex, male or female? I've got pretty equal representation here, little tiny bit of skewness towards the female, but it's not a lot. If I was real worried about that, I might get a statistician to help me with that. That's a little more sophisticated than most of us have to worry about. And give me just a second. I'm checking my meeting controls to see if there's any chats waiting for me. There are not. So I do have gender, sex, not gender, and I see that it's way down towards the bottom. So when I start running my crosstab, I'm going to need to keep in mind that this demographics information is not near the top, it's near the bottom. So as I'm searching through these, I know that my drugs are one of the early variables out of my 450, and my sex is one of the later ones. I've got the specific section R under R01, V7202 as my specific variable. All right, so I've checked my variables. I've made sure that the data that I want is there. I've checked the definitions, critically important to make sure that they match with the concepts, the operational concepts that I'm thinking of with my project. And now I'm ready to run my crosstab. So I'm going to go back and go to simple crosstab. Simple crosstab. Ha ha ha. That's fine. I'm off campus, so it's going to give a couple of odd errors. Now, you do have to set up, before you can access the data, you have to set up a My Data account, or you can log in through your ORCID, which is your personal identifier. Please feel free to talk to me about setting up your ORCID. These are really useful, especially if you're a young investigator, so that you can curate your scholarly identity. There, that was my plug for ORCID. But you have to have some way of logging in to Icpsr so that it knows who you are. And the reason is, oh no. Well, I apologize. I ran through a test of this, but I didn't run through here. And now it's flaking out on me. I'm away at a conference. And I didn't think about this part. Time period. Data format. I had not even thought about it having a restriction for off-campus login. Right. Sorry, quick troubleshooting step here. I'm hoping it'll fix the problem. One more time. Okay. Whew. Sorry about that. This is why there were a lot of screenshots first, in case the internet or the web, the magic of networking decided to blow up on me. So the reason that you have to have a login, other than so that you can log in without having to go through the campus proxy server, is because a lot of this data it's non-anonymized. What we call microdata, or case-by-case, person-by-person data that you need in order to run something like a correlation or a regression, or to pick your own way of slicing the data. It can be used in some pretty questionable ways. So you have to attest before you can access this data. And these are 8th and 10th graders, so they're young. And so it's important, really, with all research subjects, to treat them with respect. And one of the things that you are required to do, even with these relatively public private data sets, there are also more private data sets that are on here that you have to go through a little extra training for. But even with these relatively public ones, you have to say, I'm not going to use this data to violate anyone's privacy. You can imagine, even though there's thousands of people in this data set, you can imagine that there might only be so many people who were in Virginia of I don't know, a specifically Native American descent, and who are high achievers in math and low achievers in English, or something like that. If you put enough variables together, you might be able to find a specific person. If you knew that a certain school had this survey given at it, and then if you found out that that person had also used meth, there are legal implications there, and there's a violation of people's privacy. So when we collect research data, we promise that we're not going to turn a kid who confesses that they used an illegal drug or did illegal underage drinking, that we're not going to turn them into their parents or the authorities or anything like that, because otherwise we'll never get research data. So they take it anonymously, but we also, as users of the data, have to respect that we're not going to try to break that anonymity. I'm promising that I will not violate that if I do, it might go to the research integrity officer or the institutional review board. One of the reasons we do secondary data analysis a lot of times is to not have to go through the institutional review board process, but even secondary analysis is something the institutional review board is concerned with. So we still have to think about those human protection things that we're trained in when we do research. So I've agreed that I'm not going to try to find a specific person. Now I'm finally down to running my crosstab. This part's actually pretty easy as long as I've gone through all the other steps. All I have to do is find my row variable, which is a huge list, as you can see here. But because I've already looked it up, I know I'm looking for ever drink near the top. My column variable, so this is what do I want across the top, and what do I want across the side, or what do I want across the side is rows, what do I want across the top is columns. I remember that sex was pretty far down. I'm looking for the R's. These aren't in exactly the same order, but they're pretty close. So, yep. I was just there. Our sex. If I've got a person, if I've got a specific filter that I want to apply, like I only want to look at specific age ranges, if I have a statistician, or if I have the knowledge myself talking about how to weight the sample. So there are some little things that I can fiddle with here. I can just check this to get some summary statistics. And I recommend always checking that, even if you don't think you'll want it. You might decide you want it later, and it doesn't hurt. And then I just hit build the table, and it's going to do the statisticizing for me. Here are my frequencies. And did I? Oh, haha, I picked smoking. I picked the wrong variable. I apologize. Sorry, I'm flustered now from the proxy thing. Ever drink? Build the table. Let's go again. Okay, this is a much simpler table. So either yes, I have ever had a drink, or no, I have not ever had a drink. And I look at these percentages here and I say, my yeses are actually a little higher for this column. Am I seeing that right? I scroll down. Of course, you all know that I practiced this in advance. Not well enough, obviously, but I did practice it in advance. So despite my personal prejudices or my outmoded expectations, I have a little bit higher no's from male students, than I do from female students. So, and a little bit lower yeses, although I could just barely see that difference here. It's a little easier to see here for some reason. So a few more females, a few percentage points more females in 8th or 10th grade have already had a drink more than a few sips than males. So that's kind of interesting. It flies against my expectations when I first ran this. And I've also got some summary statistics, which if you are into the statistical side of this, if you're not, you can just look at this and pretty much everyone can figure out a way to use this graph, or say 31% versus 34% here. So you don't have to know statistics to work with the data. But if you do, there's a lot of stuff down here. I've got a p of 0.00, which is truncated because it's obviously, that's not actually possible to have that truly small p, but it might go out 20 characters here. Under a chi-square, I've got a lot of other indicators. It tells me that my eta is using the row variable as the dependent variable. So I've got some good coefficients here. If I want to just run on, if I want to take my r and do an r squared. So it pops out a lot of different things. I've got some good choices I can do over here. If I want to change this to grayscale, bar chart, or I want to test how a pie chart might look. I did test how a pie chart might look. It didn't actually look that much better. I liked the bar charts a lot better. But if I'm going to be doing this in black and white, I can change it to a grayscale. So I've got a lot of different options that I can do once I finally reach this stage. All right. Any questions? Because I'm almost out of time. Questions in the chat box? Oh, thank you. I did record with that little blip at the beginning. And so that recording will be available. Yeah, you can send to me to get a copy of it. There'll be a couple of days because we have to caption it, so there may be a delay, but an email will go out to everyone with the yes, my email. I will do that in a second. There will be an email that goes out to everyone for the information about the recording. Yes, thank you, Bettina. And if you want to contact me, first of all, thank you for attending our Date with Data, and I hope you enjoy your Love Data Week. And let me page back up. My email is nexner@vcu. .edu. And if you want to get more into this or have a hand with looking through Icpsr or look at other data sources, or if you want me to come and talk to a class, or you've got a study group, or any kind of that stuff like that, is all stuff that I do. So please feel free to email me. I love talking about research. I'm going to ask you about your research methods and your research question, because that's my favorite thing in the world. And I'd be happy to see what I can do to help you out. Thank you all for coming.